In this tutorial, we're going to be talking about how low back muscles help protect your lower back. And we're going to be focusing on two muscles, Longisimus and iliocostalis, which are of the group of which are known as the erector spinae group, which essentially go from the tailbone or the sacrum all the way up to the back of the neck. But we are just going to be talking about the lumbar and thoracic portions of it. The first muscle we're talking about is Longisimus. If we talk about where it starts or where it originates or the origin of this muscle, it's down on the sacrum, iliac crest, and the spinous and transverse processes of the lumbar spine. When we talk about where it inserts, it goes up all the way up into the thoracic spine and out onto the ribs. Muscle 2 is the iliocostalis, which is another muscle of the lower back. Again, where it starts is down in that same area. The sacrum, iliac crest, but also thoracolumbar fascia. When we talk about then where it's inserting, again, it's going up into the thoracic spine and out onto the ribs as well. The role of these two muscles in the mainstream, people would understand them to be spinal extensors. So what we want them, or what they're saying we want them to do, is extend the spine. So we go down onto the floor, we do a back extension, and we would extend the spine. And that's what those muscles are there to do. But as the name alludes to, they're spinal erectors. They're there to keep the spine erect. So what we are, in a sense, trying to do is maintain position. And a big part of their role is to manage the forces that go onto the spine. So, for example, we have two forces, or we have a force called shear. So if you can imagine, this is the front of the spine and this is the back of the spine. So this is the front here, this is the front of a vertebra, this is the back of a vertebra. This is the front, this is the back. And if you can imagine, you've got these two vertebrae and you've got a shear force anteriorly, which is where it wants to fall off the front, or you've got a shear force posteriorly where it wants to fall off the back. Now, a part of the role of these muscles is to prevent that shearing from happening. And when this muscle contracts, it creates a posterior shear. So it creates a shear that pulls that vertebra back. So it can prevent and counteract any anterior shear where it wants to fall off the front. So when we go into a neutral posture, so when we go into this position here, that is where we create that posterior shear force to stop it falling off the front. Not to say that it's going to do it, but it creates that force and holds the spine in position to maintain that position of the spine that we want to maintain. Now, the important bit here is that when we flex the spine, so when we go down into this flex spine position, it loses that ability to create that force. So what you then get is you get these shear forces pulling the vertebra forward. And essentially, not that it is going to fall off, but there is a condition of the spine, spondylolisthesis, where the vertebra can slip forward. And that, again, will create back pain. So it's another reason to maintain that neutral posture as we come over, because what we're doing is essentially we are holding the spine in position so none of it collapses, or the different segments don't collapse within it. So when we talk about exercise selection, and we'll talk a little bit about exercise and movement together, and then in the final one we'll talk about exercise or an exercise selection on its own. But to start with, we'll just talk about lifting, because that's something that we would do in the gym for exercise, and it's also something we would do in everyday life because we're picking boxes up, we're lifting bags up, children, all sorts. So there are essentially three things that we need to be able to do to activate these muscles and create that posterior shearing force so it counteracts the anterior shearing force that wants to make it fall off the front. And number one is the neutral spine. As I've mentioned, we want to keep that position so we can create that posterior shearing force to counteract the anterior shear. Because again, when we go into the flex posture, we lose that. So that's the first thing. So we maintain that posture. What we can then do is that activates that muscle to help with holding the spine in position. What we can then do is then brace around that and lock that into position. So we would use rectus abdominis and internal external obliques to hold that in position as we come over. So we've braced the abdominals, we've got the Longisimus and iliocostalis activated, so we're holding the spine in position. The third thing is to then use the hip hinge. So we're not flexing from the spine to get down there, we're flexing from the hip, we externally rotate the hip, and then we might just bend the knees at the end to pick the weight up that we need to pick up. So when we are doing lifting exercises, be it in the gym environment or in everyday life, those are the three most important things we need to focus on. The neutral posture to set the spine in position and allow the muscles to activate as effectively as they can activate. Then brace the abdominals to hold all of that in position, and then finally using the hip hinge to get the hips working, which takes a lot of the stress away from the spine, but also uses the bigger, stronger, more powerful movement muscles to move the weight where we want to move it. And secondly, when we talk about exercise, I'm going to talk about the bird dog, because when most people talk about rectus spinae group, they want to use back extension exercises, and that could be using a piece of equipment like that, or it could be just lying on the floor and lifting your chest from the floor to extend the spine. So what we need to do is we want to avoid those for, in some respects, two basic reasons. Number one, it creates a lot of compression around the spine. And what I mean by compression, if you can imagine I've got a sponge in my hand and I grip the sponge and I squeeze it, that's what those muscles are doing around the spine. So when we choose those, we're creating unnecessary pressure and tension around the spine with that compression. The second thing is the effect that it can have on the facet joints. So when I go into this, the facet joints are on the back of the spine, between the spinous processes. They're little joints which allow the spinous processes and the vertebra to sort of slide over the top of each other. Now what can happen is when we go into high levels of extension with high levels of compression, we can inflame those joints and we can create problems in those joints. So there's two very simple reasons to essentially stop doing those exercises. If you've got back pain, get rid of those exercises. More effective exercise is to come down onto all fours and go out into a bird dog. The reason we do this is, number one, we can maintain that neutral posture, so we can get those muscles activated. So we go into that position, we get glutes activated, we can get shoulders activated and lats activated as well. So again, we can start to combine and create a unit that is greater than the sum of its parts. The second thing is we've got half the compression, because when I lift into that position, this erector spinae is working on one side, and then when I put that one down, lift the other one up, the other erector spinae is working. So we're having the compression around the spine. So it's just a little bit more mild in the way that it stresses the spine. It will still stress the spine, but just much milder. So we need to take that into effect. Certainly if we've got back pain, we don't want to be over compressing and essentially creating a problem that we're trying to solve. What we can do is minimize that, take it away, and then we can go about overcoming our lower back pain in a more effective way. So with regards to Longisimus and iliocostalis, we want to get them activated. We want to be managing the stresses on the spine, and the best way we can do that is going into that neutral posture, whether it's lifting or whether it's using the bird dog type of exercise, so we can minimize the stresses on the spine and get the most from them with regards to the activation and managing all the different shear forces anteriorly that are happening to the spine. So to summarize this video, what we've talked about is how these two muscles can help protect our spine. The iliocostalis and the longisimus, which are two of the erector spinae group, which essentially go from the base of your spine all the way up to the neck, but we've just talked about the lumbar and thoracic portion of it. And what it's doing is when we activate it, it's creating a posterior shear force to counteract the anterior shear force that wants to sort of drop one vertebra off the top. So it's essentially holding that vertebra in place because we've got equal stresses on the front and equal stresses on the back. Now, when it comes to exercise selection, posture, it's the neutral posture that does it. and we lose that when we go into spinal flexion. So when we talk about exercises, when we talk about lifting, we need neutral spine, brace the abdominals, hinge at the hip, and move from the shoulders as well. If we're talking about exercises, we want to remove back extensions, and we want to start including exercises like bird dog, because we can minimize the stresses on the spine whilst also keeping the muscles active, which are going to essentially protect the spine. Many thanks for watching. Hopefully this tutorial has been helpful for you. If you are suffering with lower back pain, please do check out the link below, which is my How to Overcome Lower Back Pain consultation and course. So you will sit with me. Well, first of all, you'll answer 2 questionnaires. Then we'll book in your consultation. You'll sit with me. I will go through it in a little bit more detail, find out a little bit more. Then what I will do is write you a bespoke program, which will be using the content within the online course, which will then show you movements, postures, positions, loads, exercises, exercise programs on what you can do to overcome your lower back pain. So if that sounds like something that you need, just click the link below.